Group today is from Rio Americano High School in Carmichael, under the direction of Max Kiesner, I believe. And whenever you guys are ready, take it away.
So the first song that we're going to do for you is a song called Teagarden, and it is going to feature Jay Walker on the saxophone and Americano on the contract. So, what did the fish say when it swam into a wall? Damn. The next song that we're going to do for you this morning is a little standard called Georgia on My Mind. And it is going to feature Hunter Middlecoff on clarinet and Nico Contreras on trumpet, and I will be singing. The next song that we are going to be performing this morning is a standard called Black and Blue. And our soloists are going to be August Cava on the guitar, Miguel Ayala on trumpet, and Hunter Middlecoff on clarinet. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Let me go in order of what is popping into my head first. I'd like to address the drummer. Great playing. And what I am admiring about what you're doing is you're listening to what's going on around you. A good friend of mine was a professional drummer. He played with everybody. Harry James, Coleman Hawkins, you name it. One day we were talking about drum techniques, and he said, some drummers are in love with the drums, and other drummers are in love with music. And you sound like a drummer that's in love with music. I just love what you're doing. You're really coloring everything. Let me go through, I guess I'll go backward because you're up here from the last number. Very, very nice. Very nice. The arrangement, I would personally, I would get together as a horn section without the rhythm section. What's interesting is, because I had friends, when I first got into business, who were veterans from the big band era. They had played with Tommy Dorsey and Benny Goodman and all these guys. And they said, when we rehearsed, we never rehearsed with the rhythm section. And Benny Goodman used to say to the band, the horns swing the rhythm section doesn't swing the horns. In fact, if you went with Benny's band and you auditioned and you were a third alto player or a second trumpet player, what he would do is he'd sit you down with the guitar player and you would read the part with just the guitar player comping. And you had to be able to swing that part at sight. So as a horn section, it would be great to get together as just the horns. And what's marvelous about that is you can deviate from the printed paper. You can change the phrasing. Maybe I like this if I phrase it this way, or if I phrase it this way. The other thing that I like to do when I get together with my colleagues and we're doing a tune is we'll all learn the tune and then we'll work out harmonies. And what's wonderful about that is you learn the chords that go with that melody. And one of my pet peeves, if this is personally speaking, is a lot of times you play the rhythm section and they like to throw a lot of substitutions on a tune. And what happens is the substitutions get farther and farther away from the original tune. And finally the substitutions don't agree with the melody note. So if you're a horn player and you know what the original chord was, you can turn around the rhythm section and say, hey, I want this chord. A friend of mine used to play with Sonny Rollins, the jazz tenor player. And every time Rollins was going to play, he would rehearse the rhythm section. He'd say, I want this chord, I want this chord, I want this chord. But what's nice about that, when you know the chords, you can come up with harmony lines. So rather than so much unison in the melody, you can say, well, I'm going to the clarinet. I like the clarinet a third above the trumpet. And you try it. And sometimes what you want to do is, a good way to learn as a clarinet player is sit down, write out the melody on a piece of staff paper, and then write the chords over it, and then try to go a third above the melody note and pick out notes that work out as a good harmony. And it just adds so much to the arrangement. And besides, you're learning your chords more, and now you know two notes that'll fit for your solo. Your harmony note and the melody note. And it gives you more and more choices of what to play in your solo. I like to see more memorization too. Because I think that when we play music, well, if you go and look at any of the contemporary music players today, are they up on stage? If you watch the Grammy Awards, was anybody there looking at sheets of music? It's all done from memory. It's not that hard to memorize tunes, and once you get used to doing that, what happens is you get very fast at it. So that's another nice thing about it. This room, by the way, has great acoustics. I can hear all of you play without the microphones. And it's funny, when I do jazz festivals, when I walk out to the stage, the first thing I say is strike the mics. And if you take the mics off, especially if the room has good acoustics. Bands should be able to balance themselves. And if the room has good acoustics, in fact, we played a theater in Eureka, California. It was built in the 20s. And I walked out on stage and I said to the audience, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to hear the music as the first audience heard it in this room. And we played acoustically. And the sound man came up to me afterward and he said, I've been working this room for 20 years. You're the first person that ever understood it. And so, you know, in a room like this, you can play acoustic. So, and what you do is you learn how to project. And then music's a language. Now you're talking to the audience. Nice saxophone playing. Very, very nice. You know, good full sound projection. You know, it's funny because saxophone students come to me and of course, they're listening to Charlie Parker. And they want to learn to play jazz. And I said, well, Charlie Parker didn't start out playing that way, first of all. And I said, when I was in college, you know, everybody was listening to Charlie Parker, and I had this curiosity. And my curiosity was, well, who did he listen to? And then that person, who did they listen to? So one of the projects I started, and I keep saying I'm going to take it to get published, but never get around to it, is I started taking all these jazz players, starting from 1924, you know, from the first recordings. And every jazz player has a characteristic riff that they'll play. They develop a repertoire. So when you listen to a person play, you say, oh, that's him, because he's playing this little riff, you know, or this little riff. And one thing I discovered was harmonically, jazz changed very little between its very inception and Charlie Parker. In fact, if you took a Clifford Brown solo and a Charlie Parker solo and showed it to Vic Spiderbeck, he would say, okay. The only difference was the rhythms changed. You know, the style of playing. You know, Charlie Parker might be playing at 90 miles an hour, you know, and over a rhythm section that's changing chords very quickly, right? But if you look at a Vic Spiderbeck solo, you know, you could argue that Vic's is playing more extended notes per chord than Charlie Parker did. So jazz did not change harmonically. In fact, Arthur Rollini was a tenor player through the 30s, played with all the big bands. And actually in the late 20s, he played the Red Nichols and all those guys. And he said when bebop came in, he said it wasn't the harmonies that confused the swing players, it was the rhythm. But where I'm going with this is, this happened to me recently. I was teaching a student, and we were working on the written out Charlie Parker solos, and I was showing him the harmonies he used. And I said, but you're going to also have to learn Lester Young and Vic solos. And I was pointing out the phrases that Vic's played and Lester played that Charlie was just playing, just with a different rhythm, with the exact same notes. You know, there's one riff I showed him that Charlie plays in almost every solo over a 2/5. And I played him a 1932 record of Artie Shaw playing the same riff. Yeah. So I said to my student, I said, you're worried about how many notes to play, but you're not worried about how one note sounds. I said, could you walk out on stage and play one note and have the audience go, wow. But Jack Teagarden could do that, Louis could do that. So I said, go on YouTube, type in Johnny Hodges, All of Me. The next week my student came back and said, wow. He just couldn't believe it. He said, you know, so one of the people I would recommend you listen to is Johnny Hodges. Johnny, Hodges, or you can type in Duke Ellington, All of Me, or On the Sunny Side of the Street, because there's a whole bunch of television appearances where Johnny's playing. You know, he played all these gorgeous ballads with Ellington's band, but it was all about sound. And Johnny could say so much in one note. And when you did Indeed I Do, it would give you a lot of ideas on how to play that melody. Because rhythmically, you're playing it like the sheet, but you can do a lot of experimentation. And Johnny would play behind the beat with you know, and he could do so much to it. So it'd be a great thing to check out, you know. And anyway, but can we hear the beginning of this chart, the black and blue chart? You know, I've always heard it much slower, and actually, but I like the feel you're getting with it. You know, it's very nice. But go ahead. Yeah.
One, two, three, four.
try something, you know, not today, but that would make this, the first, you're playing the melody in unison, right? And what would be very effective, though, is some, you know, you can write this out, is you do 8 bars unison, and then the next 8 bars you break into harmony. You know, and you could just be a 2-part harmony and just doubling up the harmony, or a 3-part, but just looking at the chords, you know, and then playing it and writing it out that way. It would just give it a lot more interest. In the trombone with the glissando thing, what you want to do is, because you're really projecting, so you could probably lay back a little bit. But what I would do is, how's it written? You're kind of making that up, right? Yeah, because you're just coming off a lead sheet, right? But what you could do is start sooner and gliss slower. And then when you get to the top note, like hold it a little longer, so it sounds like it's going, you know, you're going to somewhere. You know what I'm saying? So it should end, the last note should end with tone. You know what I mean? Like, make the sound, make the note long enough so people can hear, oh yeah, that's pretty. You know what I'm saying? Because on this type of tune, you can come up a little bit slower on that gliss, and that would make a difference too. Yeah, I want to make sure I get everybody in, so I'm just going to go back and forth a lot. Why don't everybody come over? So yeah. The other tune we did, I want to comment you on your singing. Do you know who Lee Wiley was? Lee Wiley. Lee Wiley was a singer in the 1930s, and you know, she was kind of like a blues singer, but she was extremely popular. She was the most popular singer on radio in the early 30s. And what happened was she had very bad asthma, and she ended up retiring early. And actually in the 50s, she came out of retirement and did some recordings with Bobby Hackett. But her voice wasn't what, you know, the asthma had done a lot. But you have that quality in your voice. So when I first heard you singing, I'm thinking, she must listen to Lee Wiley. Because you always hear the people who are, you know, there's nothing wrong with this, but you can tell, oh, they're inspired by Billie Holiday, or they're inspired by Ella Fitzgerald. But you know, it's interesting to hear somebody with a different, you know, coming from that direction. But check out Lee Wiley, or if you ever heard any of the very early Benny Goodman records, there was a singer named Helen Ward, but she was influenced by Lee Wiley. You know, so you can kind of hear a little bit in her voice the influence. But yeah, I could, that was very interesting. I like the flute, and if you go on, once again, I'm going back to YouTube. There was a band in the 30s called Chick Webb and his orchestra. Chick Webb was the person who discovered Ella Fitzgerald. You know, and Ella Fitzgerald started singing with the band when she was 15. She was underage. He had to legally adopt her. Him and his wife. They adopted her so that she could sing with the band. And it's amazing because you listen to these records and she's that young. And they wrote the arrangements where she was just like another instrument. And when you listen to what she was doing, where I'm going with this is, Chick Webb, he had a band that played at the Savoy Ballroom, which held like 2,000 people. It was huge. It was in New York City. And they were like the star of that. And every band in those days had a band within the band. So they had the big band, and they had a small group that come out and play. And the name of his name was Chick Webb. The name of the small group was Chick Webb and his Little Chicks. And it was, but the group's instrumentation was 4-piece rhythm section, flute and clarinet. And there was a guy named Wayman Carver who was the flute player in that group. And you should check out those recordings because they didn't make that many. And but there's let me see, they did Sweet Sue, they did I Got Rhythm. In a little Spanish town, they did 4 or 5 recordings, and then they did recordings where they're featured with the big band. But I think you'd love to hear like how his approach to the flute and the improvisation in that style of jazz. Bass clarinet is a great touch too. I don't know why it's not used more in jazz, because it's a great sounding instrument. So I love that combination. The same thing in the arrangement that you did. There's a lot of unison. And you can get together as a horn section, you know, have a sectional and have the melody written out and the chords and just experiment. Take other chord notes and experiment with adding harmonies. You know, just remember when you listen to great jazz players, that every note they played that became part of their style was probably a mistake. You know, they were playing a solo, and they meant to play a certain note, and they played the wrong note, and they said, ooh, I like the sound of that note. And they kept adding notes to their repertoire. You know, Buddy Rich said of Artie Shaw, he said part of his genius was he could paint himself into a corner and make it sound like he meant to do that, you know, in his solos. So experimentation in solos, go for the notes that you wouldn't normally play. And say, you know, it's funny, because if you look at a C7 chord, you know, C, E, G, B flat, just a simple C7 chord, right? And if somebody came to me and said, well, I want to play jazz over a C7 chord, what should I play? I said, that doesn't matter. And they'll look at me, and I said, well, look at it. C is what? The tonic. C sounds good on the C7 chord. C sharp's a flat 9. You know, that sounds good. I like the sound of flat 9s. You know, if you listen to Sidney Bechet, he loved them. Back in the 20s, he was playing them all over the place. You know, what is a D? It's a 9. You know, and if you go up, you can justify every note of that chromatic scale, to play over a C chord, 7 chord. But the thing is do you like that sound? See, and that's what happens. Guys develop a preference. You know, take the two major trumpet players of the 20s, Bix Beiderbecke and Louis Armstrong. Louis came from a blues tradition, and so when he was, you know, you can't say enough about Louis, right? And by the way, Bix and Louis loved each other's playing. They went and listened to each other play constantly. If Louis looked at a C7 or heard a C7, what he'd play is that B flat, because that was that B, that was that blue note, and it was majestic. And most of the followers of Louis, that's what they would do. They would play the dominant 7. You know, that was the note they would play. Bix was coming from Debussy and Ravel. That's who he was listening to. And Bix would play what they called in those days the 6th or the 13th. So in other words, when you look at a Bix solo, he's playing an A over the C7 more than he will play the B flat. See, so it becomes a preference what you hear. What's interesting is the 30s, the swing era, where the big bands were king, the popular music at the time, the concept of what those musicians were doing was all based on Louis, for the most part. So they were like playing off that blues, and they were playing those B flats. But there was a couple guys that were still following Bix, you know, and what he did, you know, a lot of 9s and a lot of 13s. And one was Lester Young, the other was Artie Shaw. And you compare their styles, and you can say, wow, you know, they're playing very similar things. In fact, Lester Young's solo, composition, Tickle Tell, is based on Bix, the end of it is based on Bix's solo to Mississippi Mud. It's a direct lift of it. But the whole thing is, and then the cool jazz of the 50s, you know, you listen to Paul Desmond, those guys playing, they were, you know, you say, well, wait a minute, they're playing like Frank Trumbauer and Bix Beiderbecke, because they were listening to Lester Young. So you pick notes according to what you like. You know, Ben Webster, one of my favorites. I mean, you know, I have a friend of mine, and he teaches at a jazz school, and he plays very extended harmonies. Like if he plays a tune, you better know, he better introduce the title, because you're not going to recognize it. You know, that's how he plays. And one day we were playing a job together, and he said, he turned to me, he said, if you were on a desert island, you know, you only had one guy to listen to, who would it be? And I said, I don't know. I said, you know, I said, probably Ben Webster. And he said, me too. And it floored me because, you know, Ben Webster was so far away removed from what he played. But Ben Webster could play the tonic of a chord, just the tonic, you know, and just knock you over with his sound. So sound is the very first thing you want to consider when you play. I don't like reading music on stage. And as I mentioned, memorizing isn't that hard to do. But one thing I tell people come up to me and say, I want to learn to play jazz. I want to learn to play jazz. And I said, well, there's two things you got to think about. One is get yourself in a routine of playing scales every day. You know that you can play every major scale 3 times in a row at 60 on a metronome, which is slow. Play every one in under 6 minutes. So what's the excuse to not do that? But what happens if you're playing every scale every day, the different keys don't become keys. You stop thinking, this is D, this is E, this is F sharp. They become colors. You start hearing the sounds. You know, it becomes, this might sound crazy, but if I play a tune in concert E flat, that sounds mellow or romantic. If I play it in the key of concert C, that sounds very bright. So the key I play a tune in depends on what mood I want to have, because they have different sounds. And of course, a song is moving through different tonalities. You know, how many songs like Sleepy Time Down South is in E flat, but the tonality of the bridge is in G, right? But it's like a different color. So all of a sudden, instead of those scales being scales, it's like having a palette of paints. You have all these colors to paint with. So that's the first thing you should do, is learn those colors. And the same thing with chords, practicing your arpeggios and such, because you start to hear them, and you hear the beauty of them. They're no longer these inanimate things. So that's part of it. And then the other thing, and when I play jazz, I'm not thinking this is a C7 chord, I'm going to play these notes. In fact, a friend of mine, I used to play with this band, the guy could come and sit in. And what would happen is the piano player would just start a tune. He'd play an introduction, he'd start playing. So a guy would come in, he'd take his horn out, and he'd look at me and say, what key are you in? And I'd look at him and say, what key? And he said, how could you be playing this song and not what key are you in? And I said, well, I just hear it. I was in a recording session one time, and they were rolling tape just to, I guess, to experiment the balances. And the piano player started playing, and I jumped in, and we played 32 bars. And the engineer said, oh, what tune was that? And I said, we made it up. It was just, but part of that is every day when you're done practicing, right, before you put that horn away, or that instrument away, play a tune by ear. Play a couple tunes by ear. That it gets you away from looking at the music. And people say to me, oh, I can't play by ear. Everybody can. Once again, you hear those notes, the scale, as colors. And what's interesting about that is start with tunes that you heard all your life. It could be, I don't know, Yankee Doodle, Christmas carols are great, because they're ingrained in your ear. You see what I'm saying? Anything, nursery rhymes, but what happens is you start hearing those intervals. And then you can play, and you can pick up the horn and just say, and you hear something in your ear, and you can just play it. Roy Eldridge, somebody went with Roy Eldridge one time, and they had transcribed one of his solos. And he said, Roy, when the rhythm section is playing this chord, you're playing this note and this note. And Roy Eldridge says, man, I don't think of that stuff. And it was a friend of mine. He was like kind of disappointed. He thought Roy was going to say, well, when I see a C7, I play this note, or I do this. He says, I just play. And so develop your ear. Play, learn to play the tunes by ear. And the other thing you do is when you're rehearsing these arrangements, play 8 bars as horn section. Right? Play 8 bars, play it 3 times in a row. Then everybody don't look at the music and play the 8 bars. And you'll be surprised how much you can play without looking at it. Get away from that music. And the other thing is music's the conversation. You can talk to the audience. Can I hear a little bit of the tune with the flute and the bass clarinet? Yeah. Yeah, can I hear just a little bit of that, please? Yeah, from the beginning. We would come up from, like... Yeah, everybody who was playing on that. Who was, no, George on my mind. Just a little bit of that real fast. Double the length of your phrases. So So in other words, play the first phrase. You're reading off a lead sheet, is it? Okay. So play into the next phrase instead of taking a breath. Okay. Bring the horns up and play out there too. I know they're muted. I love the sound of mutes. But it's an intro. There's no vocal. You can bring it out more. Okay. Once again, right? Just right on the horns with everybody. 2, 3, 4. The harmony mutes are nice, but I think you can bring it out more because it doesn't. You're doing it in a beautiful part, but it doesn't come out as much. And with the clarinet, just play through the phrase, move the air faster, play out into the audience. Okay. Yeah. Same thing with bass clarinet. You can bring it out more. You know, just open up more and just give it more sound there. And one more time. One of the things when I play tunes. A friend of mine was a bass player, and he used to play with Clifford Brown, but he was one of the bands he played with was Lester Young. And one day they looked at me and he said, "You know, Lester Young knew the lyrics of every song he played." And so when you play a melody, if you know the lyrics, especially playing Cold Water, you better know the lyrics, or you're not going to remember how the melody goes. But if you know the lyrics, it helps you phrase totally different. You know, but if you go for longer phrases, you all of a sudden find that your projection is much more, and you play. It's much more comfortable to play. One more time. 2, 3, 4. Yeah, keep it going. Build it. Now, yeah, bring it out. Remember, if you're a horn player, a fast air column, a little bit of air moving fast will prevent you from going sharp. If the air slows down, that pitch is going to go sharp. I know I'm almost out of time. I just wanted to talk about the did-I-do arrangement. Okay? Can I see one of the parts of the did-I-do? Is it the lead sheet? So as a horn section, one of the things I would do also is, once again, experiment with harmonies. You know, look at the chord progression, how the chords are changing as you play the tune, and that'll help you, figure out what harmony notes to play. The other thing is the rhythm. They have da-da, da-da, which is nice, but you can also experiment with the rhythm. You go ba 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 da da da. In other words, syncopate the notes. So in other words, starting the note on the second half of the fourth beat, and then starting the second note so in other words, what you're doing is you're moving the eighth note from being on the downbeat of 1 to the upbeat of 4. So you go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Bum, 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 bum. So what it does is it kicks the melody along. Yeah, it was dance music. This was pop music of its day. And one of the things, just like music today, rhythm. And what you do is you experiment with the rhythm, and you can come up with some really nice things, and experiment with harmony notes. What I would do is, a lot of times, if I'm playing clarinet and I'm playing did-I-do, you're the key of concert C, right? Yeah. So you can play above the melody. You can go D to F sharp, and then D down to C natural for the C7. And then B to D for your G chord, and then D down to B flat for the G minor. So what you're doing is you're working on a harmony note. You just add more color to the arrangement. Those kind of, can I hear a little bit of the beginning did-I-do? Do we have time to switch? Am I out of time? Okay. You know what's interesting, because I'm looking at this combination of instruments, and also with the bass clarinet and all, You know, if you go back to the 20s recordings, and you know, when jazz was in its infancy, there wasn't any traditional lineup of what we call the front line. So you look at all these groups, and the combinations of instruments are really interesting. You know, and so it wasn't until the late 40s there was what they call the New Orleans revival, and everybody said, well, it's got to be this. This is the standard. You know, but in fact, if you look at early New Orleans, the groups, in fact, there's a great book by Barney Bigard. Barney Bigard was Duke Ellington's clarinet player, but Barney Bigard was raised in New Orleans. And he, first of all, he talks about there was the two brothers, I mean, father and son, named Lorenzo Tio, Jr. and Sr., who were clarinet teachers. And all those guys, Barney Bigard, Jimmy Noon, Johnny Dodd, studied from them. Sidney Bechet, and he said it was scales, scales, and more scales. He said every lesson was 15 minutes of chromatic scales. He said, I remember how many years he studied with Tio, and he said, Tio had never told me they were good. You know, but the other thing, he says, everybody thinks that the New Orleans jazz band is, you know, trumpet, trombone, and clarinet. He said the first band I worked with was 3 saxes and a trumpet. You know, and he said we never saw a tuba and a banjo. He said it was usually bass and guitar. You know, so there was no like this way, no standard. You know, what happens when music becomes popular? Then it gets pigeonholed. You know. But play the beginning of that D very quickly. Yeah. Just where the horns come in. Who's got the count? Okay, I'll just go right where the horns come in. Okay, now which horns come in? Is it? Okay, just try this. Instead of going da da ba da, go ba ba da da. So move that note a half step earlier. I mean half beat earlier. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just because now, what you can do is experiment. Like maybe the first 8 go da da, do it the way that is, right? Then the second 8 change it, or do a combination. Yeah, but it's you two getting together and saying, well, we're going to do this. We're going to kick this around. You know, fool around with it. You know, once again, those bands in those days, they were playing this music as a day and night. They would play late and play all night. So they experimented constantly. And the more you get together and play, the more you learn, hey, I can experiment. I'm probably out of time, right?
You're rapidly approaching.
Okay. So what you can do is real fast. You can go ba 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 da da ba ba. Then the next 4 bars ba da. Then play the way it's written. See, I mean, like just try it. So give me 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. At the very end of the arrangement, that's the one where the piano played the 3 chords at the very end, right?
It's just an octave on C. And just play this.
Yeah. Now, what you could do is just to give, you know, you're in G or what? C. Okay. What you could do is instead of playing that, play it in F6, right? So you're putting the D on the bottom. So you're playing. And just move the bottom 2 fingers up to make it a diminished, and then up to that. Yeah, it may count basically millions of dollars. You know, you can always play it up here. But anyway, just rather than do the octave C 3 times, yeah. Yeah, see? You know your chords, there you go. Yeah, so can you play the ending? Where's it? You're doing that ending 3 times, right? The tag. You try to just do the tag thing, yeah. And try. they're done. Ba da da, ba 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 da. So give it a beat. Okay, one more time. Yeah, just wait till he's done and then give us the next beat. Yeah. Yeah, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
There we go, Mr. Joe Maderi giving his, what do you think of that fellow, huh? A really, really accomplished musician.